Hello and welcome to our series of Irish native trees. This episode is all about the very beautiful hazel tree. Hazel trees are a tree that will be fairly familiar to most people in Ireland. Hazel trees are well distributed, they're all over the country, from Ulster right down to the south of Munster. They're very, very tough. They can grow in coastal conditions. They can survive being pruned or being grazed on by animals. They can survive in the darkened canopies of forests. They're one of what we call a pioneering species. Pioneering trees are trees that tend to take over an area, tend to colonize an area. They tend to grow quite quickly and they don't live terribly long compared to a lot of other trees. But trees like hazel, they can come into an area and they can spread quite rapidly. For tree time, that is, and they will change the soil and they will provide shelter and they will provide conditions that will allow more forests to grow and allow other trees to be able to eventually take over. Where we are here, in Ballyar Woods in Donegal, we are surrounded by oak trees and ash trees. And oak, mostly around here, but the ash as well, they are forming the canopy. So they're taller, they're bigger trees, and they're dominating the light and dominating the water and dominating everything in this area. So everything growing onto those trees has to be able to survive with these huge big trees surrounding them. And hazel has all the equipment it needs for that. Hazel trees, to identify them, are reasonably easy compared to a lot of trees. First off, they have multiple stems. Some trees, or most trees, will just have one big trunk, or maybe that trunk splits into a couple more big limbs, whereas hazel trees and willow trees are about the only common Irish trees that have multiple stems coming up. And what distinguishes hazel from all the others is the beautiful brown colour, this mottled brown colour that you get in the bark. Now this bark, it's hard to see because there's so much mosses and lichens growing on it. But if you look a little bit higher, you'll start to spot the colour and you'll be able to identify it very quickly. Another way, of course, of identifying hazel, and in fact identifying all trees, any trees really, is to feel the leaf. So there are a lot of trees that have roundish leaves like this. Now these leaves are quite big in size. They sometimes get bigger, sometimes bigger than the palm of my hand, and sometimes the ones at the end of the twigs or the branches are quite small, but they all have this roundy look to them with little serration all the way around the edge, and they have a little point on them. And that's one of the things that distinguishes hazel from other trees. It is roundy with the little point. And then if you feel that leaf, it's furry or soft. In fact, some school groups that I've worked with in the past have made up a little phrase that says, hairy hazel has a point. So if you feel the leaf, you see the roundy leaf with the little point and feel that hairy, nearly like downy hair that's on it. Very, very soft fur that's on it. Then you'll know it's a hazel and it'll jump out from all the other trees that you're surrounded by. So hazel trees were a very important tree in the past, for humans as well as for animals. Hazel trees provided an awful lot of raw materials for building. They were used for all sorts of different manner of tools. They were used for spindles, for chariot wheels famously. They were used for the backs of chairs. But these rods, they will grow very fast and they're quite strong. It's a good wood to work with. And these rods were also used, well, as brush handles, tool handles, that kind of thing, but were used in the wattle and daub houses. So for instance, in Dublin, when they were researching some of the old Viking sites, they found wattle and daub houses with both hazel and ash, common ash, that were used as the main supporting pieces for the structures. Hazel was coppiced in the past, and that means cutting it right down to the bottom. And you could cut this tree down right now, and it wouldn't kill the tree. The tree will just regenerate. They're an amazing tree like that. Hence they're able to do so well in places where there's animals grazing at them, and they're able to do so well in the likes of hedgerows. So they're a real survivor, these trees. But if it is chopped right down to the bottom, which people used to do an awful lot in the olden days when they relied on it more as a raw material, it would grow up very fast. You will have rods growing like this kind of thickness and this kind of height. It can grow about 2 meters in 1 year. And then you'll get thicker rods like this in about 5 to 6 years, which can be used for all sorts of different things. So hazel was very important as a raw material, but of course it was also very important as a food source. The nuts were used, and the nuts were gathered, harvested, and then eaten up throughout the winter time. And you will see that up until this very day. If you see any old cottages, if you come across any ruined cottages when you're out and about exploring, you will often see the likes of hawthorn trees, blackthorn trees, and hazel trees, which have been planted around them. And now they'll be old multi-stem trees, but still producing lots and lots of nuts. So hazel trees are one of the very first trees to wake up in the wintertime. And they're a wonderful reminder in the depths of winter that spring is only around the corner. Hazel produces these long catkins. Well, it produces them at the end of summer, actually, which is the time we're filming right now. And those catkins are quite small, but they get bigger and bigger and bigger, and they are the male parts of the tree. And by February, in that really cold month with those short days, those catkins finally fill up, and all of the pollen that's inside them is released. And that pollen is distributed by the wind. They don't need insects to fertilise them. It's the wind that does the work for the hazel trees when it comes to fertilisation. And they have tiny little red flowers. So when you're on your winter walk next February and into March time, look out for the long, pale yellow, dangly catkins. And then, on closer examination, look for the tiny little red flowers the size of a match head. Very beautiful. And once the pollen lands on them, they will turn into next year's hazelnuts. And these hazelnuts are the food source, or one of the food sources, for people in Ireland for as long as there has been people here. The very first settlers that would have arrived, say back on the shores near Coleraine, when they went into Mount Sandal, when they were searched and dug up in Mount Sandal, and that site, they believe, is about 9,000 years old. And amongst the shellfish and other remnants of food they found were, of course, lots and lots of hazelnuts. So a great source of protein, very sweet, tasty, and keeping people going throughout the wintertime. Now, people still collect them, but of course, the birds and the animals rely on them more than we do. And that's very important for the hazel itself, because if you produce a big seed like that, how are you going to spread it around the place? How are you going to have all of these hazel trees growing around, as there is in this woodland right now? And these hazel trees around us here, they weren't planted by humans, they were planted by something else. So the seed itself will fall quite close to the tree. It needs to be moved along. And the squirrels and the mice and a crow called a jay, a very colourful type of crow that lives in the forests, what they all do is they will stash a certain amount of the seeds for the wintertime. And some of the seeds that they stash, they will bury them in little holes. The jay in particular likes to bury individual seeds all around the forest. The mice will stash them in little bundles, and of course the squirrel will keep them in its little dray, its little home. But the ones that they forget to eat or don't need to eat, they're the ones that will pop up and turn into next year's hazel trees. Little tiny hazel trees that will start to grow, but grow quite quickly, and in no time at all they'll have filled out their space in only a few years, filled out their little patch, managing to soak up all that light despite the dark canopy from the mature oak and birch that are around us right now. So watch out for hazel when you're out and about exploring, wherever you are in the country. Doesn't matter if it's in parkland, if it's in towns, or if it's in rural areas. There's a good chance that there's a hazel not very far away from you. Sometimes small shrubs, sometimes reasonably big like this tree. They're a wonderful thing to have in your own garden. Plant some hazel if you can. As they give you all this beautiful colour, they give you those lovely cheerful catkins in February time, reminding us that spring is just about to happen. And of course, they give lots of shelter for animals and for bugs, and they give those lovely, delicious hazelnuts, which will come after only maybe 6 or 7 years of the tree growing, so they come quite quickly.